Think about it. For most of our lives, Apple didn't just make gadgets, they basically invented the future. They dropped the iMac, then the iPhone.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
And we all just kind of rearranged how we lived, worked, and listened to music around them. They led and the rest of the world followed.
Those are Apple fans waiting to get their hands on the new iPhone 10.
But lately, does it feel like that magic is fading? For the first time in a generation, Apple isn't setting the trend. They are sweating to catch up to it. Instead of dropping cultural shifting products, they are pushing $3,500 key goggles and begging us not to cancel our Apple TV subscriptions. Now don't get me wrong, Apple isn't going bankrupt, but the company we grew up with, that Apple, is basically gone. And what it is turning into is something else entirely. To really understand what's going on right now, you have to rewind to 1997, because it's easy to forget that Apple, the trillion-dollar behemoth we know today, was literally 90 days away from bankruptcy. They were dead in the water. And you know who had to step in and save them? Microsoft. Bill Gates handed Steve Jobs a $150 million lifeline just to keep the lights on. It's wild to think about that right now, right? Your biggest rival having to bail you out so you don't disappear. But that near-death experience did something to Apple's DNA. When Steve Jobs took back control, he didn't play it safe. He didn't hire a bunch of accountants to optimize their supply chain. He took a machete to the company, killed 70% of their products, and started taking massive, terrifying risks. Think about the run they went on. In 2001, they dropped the iPod. They weren't the first one to make an MP3 player, but they were the first one to say, hey, here's 1,000 songs in your pocket, and oh, it actually looks cool. Then in 2007, they took the biggest risk in modern business history, the iPhone. In 2007, the iPod was their main moneymaker at the time. Launching the iPhone was basically Apple saying, we are going to intentionally build a phone that makes our most successful product completely useless. That is psychotic level of confidence. But it changed the world. Then Steve Jobs pulls a laptop out of a manila envelope with the MacBook Air. Then they just invent a totally new product category out of thin air with the iPad. For over a decade, Apple was operating on pure offense. They were a company of pirates. Every few years, they bet the entire firm on a product that didn't exist yet, trusting that we would want it. And they were right every single damn time. But then the era of massive bet the company risks came to a sudden halt. On October 5, 2011, the tech world basically stopped spinning. Steve Jobs passed away from pancreatic cancer, and Tim Cook officially took helm of the affairs at Apple. When Tim Cook officially took the reins as CEO, he had impossible shoes to fill. Now let's be fair to Cook. The guy is an absolute genius. But he's a supply chain genius, not a product visionary. And this is the exact moment the entire philosophy of Apple shifted. Under Steve, they were an innovation-centric pirate ship. Under Tim, they transformed into a status and efficiency-centric juggernaut. If we are being brutally honest here, Apple hasn't really had a massive, world-altering innovation in well over a decade. What they have actually done is stay in the game by riding on the coattails of Steve Jobs' original vision. Instead of inventing the next iPhone, they just started tinkering along the edges of the current one. They add another camera lens here, they make the bezel a millimeter thin there, maybe they change the color of the titanium. It's safe, it's iterative, and to be fair, it turned them into an absolute money-making monster. Cook optimized the supply chain so well that Apple was able to extract maximum profit out of every single component. But there is a heavy price to pay for that kind of optimization. By hyper-focusing on protecting their status as a premium brand and squeezing out every drop of profit, they have become terrified of failure. The company that once gladly cannibalized its own wildly successful iPod just to build the iPhone is now unwilling, or maybe simply unable, to be the risk taker it used to be. They built a beautiful trillion-dollar fortress, but they forgot how to step outside of it. So if Apple lost its appetite for massive risk, what exactly have they been doing for the last 12 years? To really understand the Tim Cook era, we have to break it down into 3 specific points. Let's start with point number 1. Under Tim Cook, Apple reached an insane level of peak efficiency, but they fell into what I call the accessory trap. Now, to be fair, Apple has had some massive undeniable wins under Tim Cook. His superpower is vertical integration. A few years ago, Apple looked at Intel, the company that had been making their computer brains for years, and basically said, "You are too slow for us, we'll do it ourselves." They decoupled from Intel and created Apple Silicon, those M-series chip. And honestly, they are incredible. Apple now designs the hardware, the software, and the physical silicon chips beating inside them. It's a closed-loop system of systems, and it results in super powerful, ultra-reliable products. But here is the catch. Cook's Apple is amazing at optimizing the core product, but their attempts to actually overhaul the industry have completely fallen flat. Think about the biggest hardware hits of the last decade, the Apple Watch and AirPods. They make billions, yes, but they aren't revolutions. They are just incredibly useful accessories to keep you chained to your iPhone. They don't disrupt the market, they just build a higher wall around the Apple ecosystem. But when Apple has tried to step outside of the iPhone's shadow and build the next big thing, it has been rough. Look at Project Titan. Apple spent an entire decade and billions of dollars trying to build a self-driving Apple car. The result? They quietly cancelled the entire product earlier last year, with literally nothing to show for it. Then there's the Apple HomePod, which arrived years late to the smart speaker party and got absolutely obliterated by Amazon and Google. Because Siri is, well, we'll get to Siri in a minute. And of course, the granddaddy of them all, the Vision Pro. They pitched this $3,500 headset as the future of spatial computing. But instead of a culture phenomena, it's a heavy, isolating piece of tech with no killer app. Sales have tanked, and it currently feels less like the future and more like a very expensive developer kit. Under Tim Cook, if a product doesn't tether directly to the iPhone, Apple suddenly forgets how to make us want it. Which brings us to point number 2, the China gamble. To really wrap our heads around this, you have to look at the reporting by Patrick McGee in his book Apple in China. He lays out exactly how Tim Cook took Apple's supply chain and essentially tied the company's entire existence to one country. At its peak, over 90% of Apple's products were being manufactured in China. And look, we have to give credit where it's due. What Apple pulled off there is a logistical miracle. They didn't just rent some factories, they built a small empire. They trained literally millions of workers and integrated a hyper-complex supply chain of over 1,000 different components to work in perfect, absolute harmony. It was peak Tim Cook efficiency. But here is where the gamble backfired. You cannot train a workforce of millions on the most advanced manufacturing techniques on Earth and expect them to just unlearn it. McGee actually compares this to Prometheus handing the Chinese the gift of fire. China absorbed all of that world-class manufacturing know-how, and they used it to fuel their own homegrown tech giants like Huawei and Xiaomi. Apple essentially paid to build the weapons their rivals are now using against them. Because of this, Apple's dominance in China has been taking a massive hit. In fact, do you know what recently saved them from a total free fall in the Chinese market? A paint job. I am completely serious. Apple released a cosmic orange iPhone and Chinese consumers went crazy for it, nicknaming it Hermes Orange iPhone because it looks like the luxury fashion brand's signature color. Plus, the word orange in Mandarin sounds exactly like the word for success. People bought it purely as a status symbol, which caused a massive multi-billion-dollar sales spike. But let's be real, relying on a lucky luxury color trend to save your quarterly earnings isn't exactly a bulletproof long-term business strategy. Apple knows they are in a trap, which is why you keep hearing about them moving production to India. But here is the dirty little secret about that. It's mostly just an illusion. Yes, India is assembling a lot of iPhones now, but it is almost entirely just at the assembly level. They are putting the iPhones together, but the vast majority of the actual components inside the phones are still being manufactured in China. Apple locked themselves inside their own fortress they built in China. And that brings us to point number 3, which is honestly the most revealing part of this whole story. The pivot to services and the absolute disaster that is their AI strategy. Think about your own credit card statement for a second. 10 years ago, you gave Apple money maybe once every 2 years when you bought a new phone or Mac. Today, you're probably paying them every single month. Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, iCloud storage, Apple Arcade. This wasn't an accident. When Tim Cook realized people are holding on to their iPhones for 3 or 4 years instead of upgrading every 12 months, he had a problem. How do you keep revenues climbing when hardware sales flatten out? You become a landlord. Apple stopped focusing primarily on selling you a revolutionary tool and started focusing on building a walled garden so they could charge you rent to live inside it. It's brilliant for their stock price. But it completely changed the culture of the company. From how do we change the world to how do we squeeze an extra $15 a month out of our existing users? And while they were busy building those toll booths, they completely missed the biggest technological shift since the invention of the internet: artificial intelligence. It is kind of embarrassing when you really look at it. The biggest tech company on earth was completely caught off guard by the generative AI wave. And here is where we have to come back to Siri. Apple bought Siri over a decade ago. It was supposed to be the ultimate digital assistant. Today, while we have AI models that can write entire software programs or pass the bar exam in seconds, asking Siri to turn off your living room lights still feels like a coin toss. It's a complete joke, and yes, they're scrambling right now. They're frantically slapping the label of Apple Intelligence onto their new operating systems, trying to catch up to OpenAI and Google, but it feels reactive. Apple's entire modern identity, hyper-controlled, privacy-obsessed, hardware-first, is fundamentally at odds with how modern, data-hungry AI actually works. But here is the ultimate punchline to this whole AI disaster. If you told Steve Jobs that this was going to happen in 2010, he probably would have fired the entire executive board on the spot. Earlier this year, Apple essentially had to wave the white flag. They signed a massive multi-year deal with Google to integrate Google's Gemini AI into the iPhone to power the next generation of Siri and their Apple Intelligence Foundation models. Think of how humiliating that is for a company whose entire brand is built on total control. Apple, the company that spent billions designing its own custom silicon chips just so it wouldn't have to rely on Intel, had to walk across the street to their absolute biggest rival and say, "We cannot figure this out. Can we please borrow your brain?" Now don't get me wrong. Integrating Gemini is a smart move for us as customers. It will finally make Siri actually usable. But strategically, it's a staggering admission of defeat. It goes to show that this new era of artificial intelligence is no joke. It isn't just some software feature you can tinker with on the edges, and you can't just slap a premium titanium case on it and call it innovation. AI requires a fundamental, hyper-advanced software architecture that Apple's Landlord era completely ignored. When a $3 trillion juggernaut with basically unlimited resources cannot catch up to the leaders in the space and has to outsource the brain of its flagship product, it proves a point. And honestly, maybe that's why Apple's top visionaries and designers are quietly walking out the door right now. And maybe I'll have to make a separate video on the battle between big tech companies for AI talent. So subscribe if you want to see more videos like that. Anyways, what do you guys think? No one is believing that Apple is going away anytime soon. But do you think they can find that risk-taking magic again? Let me know in the comments down below. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.